How about you start?
How about it?
How about it? Because at some point we have to also finish.
Do you want to say anything, or should I just jump in?
I think you should just go.
Okay.
I like this. I like the results.
I think we should just get around the circle.
Yeah, let's do a little group hug first.
Sing Kumbaya.
So I'm Chris Carlsson, and I'm not a situationist, but I am here to talk about my long and painful relationship with radical politics, hopefully in a humorous tone of voice. I've been pretty sick for the last couple of weeks, so I'm still feeling a little bit of that. You'll have to bear with me on that front. I wrote something that's now on my blog, and later, if you wonder what I meant to say tonight more articulately, you can go and look there and read it on Nowtopians.com. And I'm not going to read it to you, but I am going to try to, occasionally I might have to refer to it just to remind myself of where I want to get to tonight. So there's a few things to say sort of up front about this interesting moment that we're living in. The situationists seem to be enjoying some kind of minor revival, at least this show being part of that. Although, the funny thing is that I got a call from somebody, I won't name him, warning me that I was associated, it's my name was associated with this.
Really?
Yeah. And it was like really horrifying.
Associated
I let my name be used with this. And this is a guy who's a close friend of an original situation. And so I was like,
Oh my God.
yeah, I know I'm associated with it. I'm speaking there on the 21st of March. What's the problem? And it's like, well, it's like, who are these people? How dare they do this? And it's just like, and that's the kind of part of the attitude that I want to kind of address in some form or another. Because this is the sort of endless cycle of, you have to be perfect, you have to do everything just so, or otherwise you're sort of like cast out and you're beyond the pale very quickly. And I've been in this world for a very long time. So I'm going to do some reprising of my own political activities, and some of them are pretty funny and some of them are less so. But just for starters, I noticed that the New York Times, actually in May, somebody wrote an article quoting Guy Debord, which I thought was interesting because it was, in my opinion, was kind of wrong. So let me just read you these two paragraphs from the guy in the New York Times, because it's kind of, he didn't misquote him, I think. With the presidency of Donald Trump, the Debordian analysis of modern life resonates more deeply and darkly than perhaps even its creator thought possible, anticipating in so many ways the frantic and fantastical, nihilistic and numbing nature of our newly installed government. In Debord's notions of unanswerable lies, when truth almost everywhere ceased to exist, or at best has been reduced to pure hypothesis, and the outline of history, when knowledge of the past has been submerged under the ceaseless circulation of information, always returning to the same list of trivialities, we find keys to the rise of trutherism as well as Trumpism. In his later work, Comments on the Society of the Spectacle, published almost 20 years after the original, Debord seemed to foresee the spectacular process that commenced on January 20th. The spectacle proves its arguments, he wrote, simply by going round in circles, by coming back to the start, by repetition, by constant reaffirmation of the only space left where anything can be publicly affirmed. Spectacular power can similarly deny whatever it likes once or 3 times over and change the subject, knowing full well there is no danger of any right post. Well, this is like a guy in the New York Times, actually a history professor at the University of Houston, and specializing in French literature and French history. So it's like, how could you say this?
What's he saying?
His name is Robert Zaretsky. And so I was a little bit stunned by reading this, because on one hand, I think everybody's sort of felt some moment of something like this in this time, like there's a big lie, and kind of go to Joseph Goebbels or whatever. But in fact, to say something like this is when it begins on January 20th is exactly to not understand the original critique. Because the whole point of what he wrote, especially in the Comments on the Society of the Spectacle in the late 80s, was that the spectacle had merged. There had become this integrated spectacle, and the original spectacle argument had to do with the 2 versions, one on each side of this Cold War. So you have the Western and the Eastern versions of the spectacle. And that by the time you get to the late 80s, there was no longer a difference between them. And I think Debord was spot on in that analysis. And I remember reading the comments and thinking, wow, this stuff is great. This is so clear compared to the original book, which was so hard to read and so difficult to make heads or tails out of half the stuff that he said. It was like deliberately convoluted. This was just clear, really clear writing, really to the point. But here's the drama then, is that this world that he was describing is in some ways the world this guy Zaretsky is trying to use against Trump. And without realizing that he's invoking a version of the spectacle to be the truth. And so in some ways he completely makes the point by accident of the original analysis. So in Zaretsky, in the original case, the point was to say that this similarity of the integrated spectacle, the commonality of the experience was that on the common, easy way to look at the world for living in the West, oh, the horrible Soviet Union, one-party state, complete domination of the media, only one point of view ever appears. Well, what's the difference? And in some ways, that's what we have. We have basically a one-party state. Oh yeah, there's Republicans and Democrats. There's two factions. We really have these weird public spats about things. And that's different than how the Soviet Union functions. But nevertheless, the basic agreements about empire, about war, about the role of the military, about the function of property and wage labor, those basic institutions, the basic structure of life, is just never even brought up. It's unchallengeable. And in that respect, the spectacle serves its purpose, which is to keep you busily paying attention to things that seem very important while the real fundamental issues of daily life go completely ignored. So I think that Zaretsky's argument that somehow Trump in this moment, of course the guy represents in some ways, actually I'm arguing that he's actually represents a backwards challenge to the spectacle as we understood it from that analysis. Because where there had been an integrated spectacle for all these years, and I'll remind you, 4 years before he wrote this comments on the Society of Spectacle, there was actually Margaret Thatcher going, hey, there is no alternative. This is it. There's no other way of life than the nuclear family, the neoliberal model, et cetera, et cetera. So Trump comes along and blows this up to some extent. He's also accelerating aspects of it that we probably consider the worst things. But the blowing up of it, I think, is in the sense that, Trump comes in and he's trying to create, not him, I'm going to use his name to imply, a larger entity and a larger faction in the ruling class that has an agenda of its own, which is to create another hegemonic worldview that they would love it if it was the spectacle, that it had that same power, that the way that the mass media, the sort of center-right media of CNN, major newspapers, the network television stations, et cetera, have held this kind of intact version of reality in front of us all these years. And these guys have come along and said, well, those are all lies. Everything they say is a lie. And everything we say is the truth. And then, of course, their version is so patently false and provable on an everyday basis. They're just spewing these kind of lies about trivial shit on a really regular basis that for most of us who are in some ways critical thinkers, but also even just having been living on the coast in that media universe for so long, we just can't understand how anybody can believe this stuff. Like, how is it that anybody thinks anything coming out of their mouths is credible or has valid validity? Well, it doesn't matter if it does or doesn't, because their mission is to create a world in which there's enough people that believe it that they can maintain power. And so far, it's been somewhat successful in that regard. So there's something curious about the role of Trumpism in shattering the hold of the original spectacle, which had this pretty all-pervasive quality that none of us ever figured out how to break it, other than through snide humor and things that we're going to talk about a little bit tonight, things like throwing darts from the sidelines, throwing the mental hand grenades wherever we can, to try to make it clear, make it visible, what was seen to us to be invisible to most people. But then now there's something different going on, and I don't actually know quite how to make any strong conclusions about what this means, something we could talk about together, but perhaps when I finish blathering, about where that goes and what that means. Because I don't actually think it has much chance of succeeding in the larger scheme of things for very long. But it represents something different than what this analysis of the spectacle had represented for a very long time. So, given the fact that there's this conflict at the level of spectacular reality in the ruling class, different factions duking it out, and most of us are just spectators of that regardless, which is certainly part of the original critique. Something new started happening not too long ago, which is that there's been this huge resurgence of people moving into civil society and taking action on their own. So, whatever we can talk about the meaning of the women's marches and the seizure, the mass actions at the airports, and then whatever's coming down the road next, we don't know. But those two particular set of events I thought were really interesting because of the extent to which there were so many people whose worldviews had just fallen apart right in front of their face during the previous month. And instead of just sitting at home being depressed and cowering, they actually felt like, no, I can do something. I can go and be part of this thing. And then you went to, I don't know how many of you guys went to those women's marches, I did. And I went there holding my nose because I'm snotty and radical who thinks he knows it all, right? And that's part of what I'm critiquing here tonight, myself and all of us who've been in that world. But I went to those rallies in Oakland first in the morning through the middle of the day, then I went over to Oakland, San Francisco, and then it was like pouring rain, and you had 200,000 people close together, hugging each other, going up the street. It was really moving to me. I mean, I was like in near tears repeatedly throughout the day because I would see these families pushing their kids with their little signs, and it's like, it was so much earnestness. It really hit me. And that, I think, is kind of one of the cruxes of what I want to get to about the ways we've sabotaged ourselves over a 40 or 50 year period with this sort of ironic stance, with this sort of distancing that we're always involved in, because we're just so goddamn too cool for school. And we got to have the most radical position. So when you have to have the most radical position, you always are in a position of sneering at everybody else for not having it. And it's a comforting position to hold if you can sort of never have to answer for it. But as soon as you actually have to engage with the world around you, which is what you kind of are making sure you don't do by sticking to that kind of stance, that ironic stance. And it's not just irony. It's actually more than just being I love irony, and I've been involved in sarcasm and irony since the beginning of my adult life, really. And it's a common attitude, it's a common reaction to an absurd world. Why not? You've got to joke about it at least, it's sort of a minimum response. But I do feel like it's had this crippling effect on me and many other people because it makes it really hard to engage with people who don't share that sensibility. So, I'll even talk about it in terms of process world, and I'm going to show you a slideshow that's going to go by. Maybe I should just start the slideshow because it just kind of has its own life. How do we get to the other thing here? Macintosh specialist help. There's another window open already.
That's okay. I think we opened it up right down here.
Yeah, I'll just run that. So this thing's going to have a bunch of stuff on it.
You want us to play?
A lot of them are going to be process world images going by. It's on a 30-second timer, I think. It was when I got here. So you should be able to just turn it on.
Naturally?
Yeah, just put
Okay.
slideshow and I'll just go.
Right.
And there's other things in there that I'll talk about more later. But anyway, trying to get to this idea about the role of it's not just a question of being sort of ironic and sarcastic, although the Process World was the magazine with a bad attitude. And that was how we found each other at work, was with that attitude. It was very corrosive and very fun. And it was really a big part of what made it easy to find each other, was as soon as you found somebody else who shared your sense that the work you were doing was just a stupid waste of time, the boss is an idiot, the company had no point to exist, all these different things that have come up around that. I should move over so you can see better. It's actually better to look at. It worked really well, but one of the things that happened over the years is we actually had hundreds of people participating in Process World writing to us. And they would send us letters from all over the country from most of the 1980s about their own work experiences. And when they did that, we'd get really excited because we really felt like, okay, this is really working, we're really making these connections. But then later I'd have different people who had been in communication with us get in touch many years later, very sheepishly, to say, I'm sorry I dropped my subscription. I actually didn't really want to read the magazine anymore because I found a job I liked. And I didn't know what to say. I felt embarrassed. And it's like, well, that tells you something, right? Because, our idea across this world, those of us, we didn't have a constant set of opinions about anything really, but the sensibility that we kept reproducing year after year for 32 issues in 13 years was that you should be in a state of constant irritation and sort of, sarcastic refusal around work. And that was because work was unbearably stupid and empty and false. But if you found something you liked to do and you got paid to do it, that was what everybody was doing. Even all of us working on the magazine were essentially withdrawing from stupid jobs and eventually finding something we could stand to do. It's very hard to get up every day and go to something you fucking hate. So you're going to find something you hate less. And I've done a lot of things for money over the years, and almost everything gets poisoned as soon as I start doing it for money. Like I do this history project now, and I still like doing it quite a bit. It's partly because I don't really make a living at it. I get some money from it, thank God. I don't maybe look at my bills. But I don't do it for the money. If I did it for the money, I think I wouldn't like it anymore. And that's been true for me throughout. But I'm weird that way. I don't have the same attitude on these things that most people do. There is this rising sensibility, rising need for a bunch of years now about do what you love. Just do what you love. If you love it, oh, the money will come and you'll succeed and the world will be beautiful. And it's like, what a bunch of morons. The vast majority will do shitty jobs for low pay, in onerous conditions, and sometimes several jobs at once. And there is no real escape from that for most people. Obviously, some people who are fit into various categories of commonly referred to as privilege have more opportunities to escape from that than others. So something to talk about and unpack in more detail as we talk about it some more. But I want to get back to this notion of the role. It's not just about taking the ironic stance and standing kind of aloof all the time, although that is something that I want to stick critically about. But there's this reality that I was sort of introduced to by being part of the Union of Concerned Commies, which is the first step that you saw up there, where we went through a process of being first. There was an anti-nuclear sort of think tank of super ultra left radicals. Some of them were anarchists, some were people inspired by the situation as pro-Situs, as we referred to them at the time. Others were really quite more leaning towards being German council communists, followers of Paul Maddock Sr., if you can believe that, and critique of Keynesianism. Anyway, it was an interesting group of people that I stumbled into at a young age. I was about 22, and I got that flyer that you saw go by already, the nuclear power is no accident, at the one-year anniversary of 3 Mile Island. And I had been an anti-nuclear activist myself and helped start one of the groups in the Union Millennial Alliance, and been doing that for several years. At the point, I was totally frustrated with anti-nuclear politics as being too narrow. And here's this flyer that says nuclear power is no accident. I was like, yes, exactly. It's like it's part of this larger system. It's obviously the case. And so I went to their meeting after I responded to the email. It wasn't email in those days, it was a PO box. Wrote a letter, went to the meeting, and then hooked up with the group and got involved. And then we started having these interesting debates. And we were kind of got into a sort of a series of fractured discussions. They were fighting fairly bitterly over this idea of minimum sense of community. And could never agree. Never. And so then, as it turns out, I ended up leaving for the fall with one of the other people in the group. We became a couple and started to life together, etc. And we were on the East Coast for a bunch of months, and we were hanging out with the branch back there. And then we came back to San Francisco, and our friends in the Union of Concerned Commies were having a meeting in February. They were really depressed. And this was the time of bum, 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 America held hostage, day 378. If you weren't around for it, you just can't even imagine it. This kind of right-wing media universe that we get today with Fox and all this. It starts with ABC starting a new show at 11:30 at night. And it was originally called for a long, long time America Held Hostage, and eventually turned into the ABC News Night Watch, or Night Watch. That's turned into Night Watch. So, but it was about pumping this hysteria about we're getting screwed by the Arab, the Iranians in this case, but of course Americans don't make those distinctions, so they're just Arabs, brown people far away fucking us over. And it was, kind of a rising hysteria that is sort of similar to the kind of xenophobia we're dealing with now. People were really blaming these others for all the problems in the country. And this is at the end of the Carter regime. Reagan's running for office, running for president against Carter, and Carter's had this sweater speech a couple years earlier about the malaise in the country, and we just have to wear sweaters because of this. Ratchet down our energy use. I mean, it's hard to remember what it was like if you weren't there, but it was really weird. And so, I come back to this meeting and I think, this is ridiculous. Let's get it over with. Let's just declare martial law. And so everybody's like, what? And then we started talking about it, and it was like, let's do it. Let's go get military sort of surplus uniforms. We'll put oil company insignia on them and get helmets, and let's just do it. And then some of the people were more theatrically minded. They came up with this whole Iwo Jima thing for us to do at the beginning, to the flight of the Valkyries, which has just come out of Apocalypse Now. And so we started doing that. We started performing on the streets. We just went down to the financial district, just did this whole performance that we wrote with all these skits. And a lot of the skits were attacking the left, like the Spartanoid League, and the Reactionary Communist Party, and Chairman Moo, and all this. We just thought the left was the problem. And so this is in some ways, my starting point in radical politics is there were a bunch of people who were convinced that the old left and even many parts of the new left were the problem. You had to get them out of the way so that people could see there's a more revolutionary way of doing things, and that these leftists were essentially poisoning the well. And then I was in turn subjected to that same argument, the same logic, and same set of accusations over and over again from then on. So I got really used to being part of that world in which the whole culture spends its time denouncing each other and trying to expel you. And then that's what the situations were doing back in the late 60s. They were the aces at expulsion. There was constantly people thrown out and never talked to again. And then as I was coming over here tonight on the board, I was thinking about that, and I realized I've been doing a lot of research because I'm going to work on another book about that sort of starts in the depths of the Cold War in 1957 and goes to 67. That decade suddenly became very interesting to me. But reading a lot of these old memoirs of Communist Party members, and I've known a lot of these people over the years through other political connections that came into my life. And it's curious because when you look at Victor Serge's writings or the writings of anybody that was ever on the outs with the CP, the official Communist Party line, this is the same experience they had. Expulsion, 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 denunciation. You're the enemy. And it's very similar to the language of political correctness today, the characterization of people as being the enemy if you say something wrong, use the wrong language. This was in the 50s, even earlier times, it was used really repeatedly over and over again. So I feel like there's this kind of, sort of new version of it that a lot of us have been involved with for the last 30, 20 or 30 or 40 years, in which our attempts to be perfect, to find the perfect radical critique, leads us into this position where we can't work with hardly anybody, because everybody's so tainted and sold out and inadequate, and part of it is something that's just less than what it should be. Now, I can say that in one breath, and the next breath I can turn around and say, I can't stand liberals, and I've never worked with anybody who thinks the Democratic Party's got anything worth saving, and blah, blah, blah. I can easily go right back to it, like a drop of a hat, because it's the comfort zone. It's really, that's where I feel like I'm right, and where what I'm doing makes sense to me. And as soon as I realize, well, didn't I just put myself back in the box again? Yeah, I kind of did, but I really can't work with liberals. I really can't stand electoralism. I really think it's impossible to, that is what reinforces the world as we know it. That is what makes the spectacle have its grips on so many people. To imagine that democracy exists is false. It does not. There is no choice. The choice is to carry on as it is, or be killed, or in jail, or cast out as a lunatic. I get to be a lunatic pretty often. I haven't been killed or jailed for my thoughts yet. I don't know if that's actually happened to me. But it's certainly happened to an awful lot of other people. So I guess what I want to just come back around to finally about that is just to say that there's this sort of really comfortable place of invalidating everybody around, and then the worst version of this that I've experienced, I've never quite let myself do this to anybody, but I've had it done to me and I've seen it done to people a lot, is sort of notion of recuperation. Really the right word in English is co-optation, but French use recuperation, and of course the really cool pro-Situ folks had to use that in English. So if you were doing something that was just politically not good enough by their standards, you were recuperating. That means you're part of capital. And if you take that logic to its full extent, there's your cul-de-sac, the title of my talk tonight, gazing ironically into the cul-de-sac of radicalism. Because if you really think it through, nothing you can do, and this is true for the communization of people today, the anarchists today, people around Occupy who are just like absolutely pushing the limits, people who think that the whole point is to have total revolution now. Now, like anything less than total revolution is the problem. You're actually in the way. Get out of the way, because we're going to have total revolution now. Well, what the fuck does that mean? I mean, it doesn't even mean anything, and yet it's used like a club over and over again inside of groups of politically active people to throw people out, to make sure that there's these divisions that take place, that people are invalidated in their participation because they don't get it, that the only solution is total revolution. It's like, well, we can have a debate about what kinds of radical changes we really need to start thinking that the quality of life is changing for the vast majority of us. What would that mean? What does revolution even mean? I like that conversation. I find it really interesting. But I'm not really very comfortable anymore with deciding that whole swaths of the population can't be in the conversation because they vote or because they're white. or because they're middle class, or they're cisgender straight, or whatever. I just like all these categories that just, oh, sorry, you can't be in the conversation anymore, you're in the wrong group. I'm just like done with it. We're losing. We have lost badly. Here we are, a tiny group of people in a room to talk about radical politics in a world in which the lunatics have taken over the asylum entirely. And yet there's still a lot of people who will argue to their last breath that the point is to purify the political line. And this is true for Maoists, it is true for Stalinists, and sadly to say it's become true for, I think, a lot of people who are smarter than that, and are actually interested in a very radical alternative to the way life is organized, but are personally find it painfully uncomfortable to work with people who don't already think like they do. Like there's a kind of a sense like, eat like I eat, shop like I shop, wear the shoes I wear, to make the same consumer choices I make, because those are the signifiers of your participation in a certain state of being, a certain way of understanding the world. And in any one of those, if you fail, not to mention your ontological categories that you occupy, all these things you have to denounce those. If you don't denounce those, you can't be in the conversation either. Wow, we just are crippling ourselves over and over again, as opposed to the idea that, well, I don't know who's going to come up with a good idea to change the world, but I'm pretty sure it isn't me anymore. So I want to be in the conversation with a lot of different kind of people, and I want it to be a space in which there can be sharp and angry, critical engagement, and we don't hate each other at the end of the process. And I can totally disagree with you. I can denounce the outcome of what I think would be the logical result of the politics you're proposing, and I can still have a drink with you afterwards and say, yeah, come on, let's just be friends and carry on, even though I'm going to keep disagreeing with you on those issues. And that seems like what we need to get to as a culture, that's comfortable, even though it's comfortably uncomfortable. That's kind of what I'm shooting for at the end of the day. Let's see. I think I did it in a very different way than I wrote it here. But I think I got to the main point I wanted to get to there. So let me just tell you some stories. And then I have a few web pages to share with you as well. And then we can just have a conversation, because obviously, you guys probably know as much about all this stuff as I do. You may have some very interesting other ideas of how to present it. So that was in the Centerfold of Process Rule number 9, so the certified bad attitude, where we laid out exactly all the reasons why you should be rewarded for thinking badly about your work. And then critical mass is, of course, a later episode of my personal life. So the sequence of events for me, and I sort of had my hand in a lot of stuff over the years. Well, critical mass is important to emphasize. I've gotten a worldwide reputation as the person who started it, which is really, really false. And so I always have to debunk that. It's only because I wrote a lot of stuff about it at a certain point in time. I had the opportunity, and I was around. I was there at the beginning, along with a bunch of other people, and made a lot of things like that and handed them out. And people kind of look at me as like, well, you did all that stuff, therefore you started it. Well, I didn't. There was dozens of people who started it together in San Francisco, and dozens more people who started it together in 400 cities around the world. And it's not because they read the rules that somebody, that I or anybody else put out and then followed the rules. They reinvented this experience of being in an urban environment on bicycles and deciding to ride home together once a month. And each city's made its own version. It's actually quite uniquely different almost everywhere you go. There's some similarities. Sometimes the common thing is to have signs like that, honk if you love bicycles, where people are beeping at you, and you have this thanks for waiting sign you hold up. And when the beeping gets really intense, you flip it and it says, honk if you love bicycles. Like, everybody gets really frustrated because it's been honking like mad at you. So we did a lot of this funny stuff over the years around critical mass. And what critical mass was trying to do, in my opinion, and it's only my opinion, not everybody shares this idea, it was much more than about bicycling. Bicycling, sure. I mean, of course, we were bicyclists, so we decided to take advantage of that. And the idea, the starting point was, let's just meet as a group. Normally, the experience throughout the 1980s, we all knew each other. Everybody on a bicycle pretty much knew each other. There wasn't that many of us in San Francisco. So the idea was, let's meet up once a month and ride home together from the foot of Market Street. Geographically, that works in San Francisco because everybody goes from east to west to go home, pretty much, unless they're from the East Bay, but most days still in the early 90s. Bicyclists in general did that. So we put the call out. A bunch of us were handing flyers out in the streets for a few weeks ahead of time. There was at least, like I say, 2 dozen people in the conspiracy to start this thing. And then we went down there, and amazingly, 45 to 50 people showed up to the first ride. We rode straight up Market Street, turned left on Valencia, and went to Zeitgeist, and that was it. Just a simple thing. Went to a bar and talked about how exciting that was. And the idea was to fill the space with bikes and make it so there was no room for cars. We didn't know if it could happen, if it was going to be completely accidental or really take off, or what was going to happen with it. And surprisingly, it was amazingly euphoric to fill the streets with bikes and be able to talk and hear the sound of the whirring wheels and the tinkling of bells and not have the motorized traffic dominating the experience. And so that was incredibly exciting for everybody. And then quickly there was the idea of xerocracy. Anybody could be a xerocrat. And everybody has access to a copy machine somewhere in their life. Just make your own ideas, put them on a piece of paper, go make 100 copies, bring it to critical mass and hand it out. And for a while that happened. Not very long, as it turns out. It was about a 2 or 3 year period in which there was a fairly high level of participation by lots of people in San Francisco. In other places, the stories are somewhat different than this. But anyway, so we did a lot of that in the early days. And I have a typesetting business in a graphic art shop. That's part of why I was super involved in that kind of stuff. So critical mass then takes off and becomes a sort of monthly social event for a lot of us, and really changed our lives in meaningful ways, and changed the city and changed the reality of the world. Because now there's a huge movement of bicycling all over the world. There's a big resurgence of daily cycling, which is good for every single person on the planet. Even though tons of people hate critical mass and think it's the worst thing that ever happened. And it's like, how dare you, ruining all this bicyclists, ruining it for bicyclists. How's that? Have you noticed all the infrastructural changes that have taken place slowly but surely over the years? That didn't happen just because somebody thought, well, it's a good idea to take care of bicyclists. No, it was because there was a mass seizure of the streets by thousands of cyclists every last Friday of the month for years and years. And politicians say, well, we got to do something for these people because they vote and they care and they're clearly in motion. They're taking direct action in the city to change the world. And so that was the experience of critical mass. And then, how did it spread around the world? Well, just word of mouth. People called each other from San Francisco. They called their friends. One guy we had helped him escape from the Iron Curtain. He came from Poland in 1990 and he overstayed his visa and was there in San Francisco for the first critical mass, and he calls his friends in Poznan and says, oh my God, he knew he had some green activist friends back there. He says, you've got to try this thing out, this bike ride is totally great. And so the next month there was a second critical mass in Poznan, Poland. And then it just kept going to London, and it turned out there was one in Havana very quickly, and Rio de Janeiro, and now it's all over the place. So critical mass was part of this sort of addressing the problem in some ways that was critiqued by situationist thinking through the derive and the idea of having psychogeography and these kinds of things, of re-inhabiting the urban environment on a different basis, on a basis that had no commerce associated whatsoever, and it was in motion. Those two things were what really radically altered people's consciousness, in my opinion. And even if you didn't like it, or you didn't spend very long there, or you only went once, it's going to change your imagination about what's possible pretty much forever. You can never really see the city quite the same way again once you've ridden in critical mass and you realize, like, oh, we actually can do this, take the city and do something different with it. So I was very pleased about that outcome. And now, after all these years, I'm kind of an accidental diplomat. I'm going down to Mexico City again in April to the World Bike Forum. And the main argument I'm telling them in South America, and I've been to several of these already, 2 in Brazil and 1 in Chile last year, is my argument is rising in temper and crescendo over time is like, bicycling is not enough. You cannot make a politics around bicycling and leave it there. It's got to get bigger than that, or you're shooting yourself in the foot. Because in San Francisco, we're the mecca for people on critical mass rides all over the world. They think they want to come to San Francisco and be part of it. And they get here, and there's like 60 people left. Most of them are naked men, and it's kind of boring. It's actually not kind of boring, it's extremely boring. And so there's no life left in it. It has had its life and passed a long time ago, and that's fine. Things don't have to last forever. Same thing with Process World Magazine. It went from 1981 to 1994, and then it kind of petered out. And we did another one in 01 and 05 that we were excited to do the 01 one, and we had so much fun. We thought, well, let's do another one. And we had such a terrible time on that, we'll definitely never do it again. And so, things have a life. They don't have to last forever. That's not really the point. We're not trying to build institutions that last forever. But then the last thing that I got involved with, which is in some ways a response to the critique by Deborah, I didn't quite see it that way when I was starting it. I wasn't thinking as deliberately, but it had penetrated my mind from running into it earlier. So I'll just refresh our memories. De Boer describes in the comments on the Society of Spectacle, the integrated spectacle's 5 principal features. Number 1, incessant technological renewal. Number 2, integration of state and economy. Number 3, generalized secrecy. Number 4, unanswerable lies. And number 5, an eternal present. And so basically that reality, that critique was definitely part of my worldview. And in the mid-90s, I had my own way of making a living kind of eroded by what many people have experienced over the last 100 years, technological revolution, incessant technological renovation. And so I went from one day to the next noticing my typesetting machines that I had becoming obsolete. And then I was looking over my partner's shoulder, he had WordPerfect 5.0 on Windows 3.0, and there were suddenly thousands of two-type fonts in half-point increments. And I was still running machines that had film strips that you had to change every time you want to change a font. And it had only set sizes, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12, 14, 18, 24, 30, 36, 48, that's it. And then you had to print it onto photographic paper inside the machine, no memory, take it and run it through 4 chemical baths, hang up the galley, eventually cut the type out of the galley, put it through a hot wax machine, and then paste the hot wax down and burnish it. And now you take a photograph of that page you laid out, and you can make a plate to print it. All that got eliminated like that through desktop publishing, vast majority of it. Still there's a design talent that you can use going forward, and I did, and I still do. But I noticed that I was losing my ability to make a living. And so what I decided to do at that point was, how did I learn how to do typesetting? Well, the Process World taught me how to typeset, because I had gotten the machine first, and then I had the Radical Magazine idea second, and then luckily I had the technology to do it with. And that was when everybody was still putting things out on courier typewriters. So having a typesetting machine made the Process World look a lot better than it would have. Now I'm in the early to mid-90s, and there's this buzz, interactive multimedia. It's going to change everything. It's not going to be any more newspaper, no more magazines, no more radio or television. Everything's going away. It's all going to be delivered on CD-ROMs. Remember that? And so Shaping San Francisco started out as a game idea. It was going to be a bike messenger game. I won't bore you with the details of that, because we threw it out after a year and a half of a ridiculous number of hours of work. But we had started to create this really complicated, nonlinear, multimedia version of the history of San Francisco. And then we thought, well, that's complicated enough already. Let's just work on that. And so we kept going, and eventually it comes out in the beginning of '98 with a series of public kiosks around the town, because we didn't really believe this idea of interactive multimedia. That was malarkey. It's basically glorified multiple choice in a box. But there's something different about this art form of a nonlinear archival experience, where you go into it without a grand narrative telling you how to think about it, or telling you what the steps are through it, or anything like that. So we tried to do something new with it, and that's what we did. And so Shaping San Francisco is essentially our effort over the years to attack this eternal present, the idea that the world's always been like this. What else could it be? It'll always be this way. We're just stuck with it. We get that all the time while we're selling process worlds on the street. You saw the pictures of me go by with the funny costumes on. And we were out there for Fridays for years and years in the financial district in the 1980s, and it was a very common experience to have temps come out of their offices. That's most of them would even stop and talk to us. And people are going by in large crowds during lunch hour on Friday, and they're like, they don't want to look at you because you must be religious, or you must be a lunatic, or both. And so, I get that. I probably react that way too originally. But then we had these funny costumes on. So we had the Book of Amnesia box that you saw that went by there. There was also a tied box that said, bound, gagged, and tied to useless work, day in, day out for the rest of your life. And then a whole series of ingredients on the back. Another one, I'll show you the video of it in a second, of a planter's peanut can. It says, humming electronic plantations, making us nuts. No ideas used in processing. So we'd be out there, if you hate your job, you'll love this magazine, check it out right here at Process World. And people are like, what? Hate your job? What? He said, take the afternoon off, read a magazine, go ahead, you might go back, it's a waste of time. And people, 10% of people would stop. Not very many, but enough. And so they would stop, and then 10% of them would actually get a magazine for $1 or $2, whatever they were asking at the time. Because we found out if we just gave it to them for free, they would throw it in the next garbage can. But if they exchanged $1 for it, now it's valuable, they'd keep it. So that's why we did that. We got really beat up about that too by a couple of really very radical friends. Because we were selling the processed world. That was a big sellout thing for us to do. So, going from processed world over all those years and then realizing that this amnesiac world that we live in, people come out of their on their lunch breaks and just feel like, oh, what do you mean, man? It's always like this. What else are we going to do? It couldn't be the other way. No, this is actually a really specific moment in history. It was really different not that long ago, and it's going to be really different going forward. What do you mean? I don't know. It's just like people don't have any real historical literacy in our culture. And that's just what it is. It's still like that. But I got excited about doing a project that addressed that directly. Try to actually throw a wrench into that ability of people to maintain that state of mind. And so the original version of the project went out as public kiosks, like in the public libraries. We had several kiosks, and we also put it in Rainbow Grocery and Cell Space, and they moved around sometimes. So they were all over the city. And the idea was that you'd be sitting looking at our kiosk, which has sort of weird wraparound art that we made for it, just like a computer. And you'd be looking at it, and what we thought would be cool is somebody comes up behind you and goes, what are you looking at? And you go, I don't know, some crazy communist made this thing. I have no idea what it is. And then, what is that thing? And they might start talking to each other. That was it. That was the holy grail for us. Like the interactivity we wanted was strangers in public discussing history. Wow, that was our Trojan horse effort. Like we're going to put all this time, thousands of hours and 3 years of work to build this software that's totally kludgy and weird, and then we're going to put it in computers and make it available for free in public, and the whole thing is to get people to talk to each other. And as far as we know, it did to some extent, but it was, useful and interesting failure. That's so much of what I've done in my life. And we did some books at the same time. I actually brought some of them with me in case anybody wants to buy books. The history books we did at City Lights over there. And then, Shaping San Francisco evolved over time. There's a long story about the technological cul-de-sac we found ourselves in, that CD-ROM software, and everything that we created in the early part of it. By the time you get to 2001, and Windows XP comes out, our project stops working. So we had to re-engineer the whole thing and get out of being on proprietary software, which we would have done originally if we thought about it enough, but we just didn't have the money and didn't know what to do, so we did what we did. And then many years later, by now, since 2009, we had our archive open at foundsf.org. And so I'm going to use that as an excuse to switch out of the slideshow, which you've probably seen 2 or 3 times by now, and go over to the website, because I've got about, I think it's 9 screens of fun, if you can call it that. So first, here's the Union of Concerned Commies. Are we on for the sound? So there's that Defiant Celebration. We actually had one of the guys in the group, Daniel Stephen Crafts is his real name. He used to go by Terry Holmes, but he made this lovely little ad, fake ad for Defiant Celebration. So let me play that for you.
The Democratic solar-operated Chrysler Corporation presents Defiant Celebration, the bulwark of our nation's defense policy for the 80s and 90s. Designed to fill only half of the average American's 2-car garage, this beautiful mini-tank lets households participate directly in the defense of America against foreign and domestic troublemakers. A little dynamo that can make sorties through your neighborhood and to the supermarket at up to 65 miles per hour on a bright sunny day. And wait till you test its versatility on city streets for crowd control. The Democratic solar-operated Chrysler Corporation is proud of its vital role in fulfilling the call for a decentralized, solarized defense system put forth by future presidential hopeful Barry Commonplace. You can help too. Join your local National Guard, police department, or military unit and sign up for Defiant Celebration. There's a free 2-year training course. Defiant Celebration. Proof that going solar will not prevent us from maintaining our domination at home and abroad. Defiant Celebration, helping business keep its place in the sun.
I mean, this, I don't even remember, but Barry Commoner was the actual candidate at the time, of sort of the Bernie Sanders of the time, and did actually propose a decentralized, solarized defense system. And so we were like, okay, you're asking for it, motherfucker. Then, this is a little bit of a very short clip with no sound. No, it does not have any sound, but just to show you what it was like to be out there hawking magazines back in the day. That's me, believe it or not. We had these VDT heads also. The VDT head says IBM, intensely boring machine, and then the keyboard says, oh no! And everybody would come up and want to type on it. It was very, very odd kind of thing. So, let me stand aside here. Yeah, there's various covers. There's a long, what was that one? Yeah, half-hour radio magazine. You can go there and listen to that. Lots of fun stuff. What we did was a series that came out of all the letters to the editor from this project. We developed a show that we did at Commotion, and eventually we did it at the Institute for Contemporary Arts when our anthology came out in London, called the Attitude Adjustment Seminar. And it was essentially a bunch of us reading. Really, we were not very theatrical, so it was just like having these scripts that we would read of people's comments about their horrible lives that they had. In 1984, we participated in this project that came to our door. It was actually friends, overlapping friends here. And the End of the World's Fair was this one. And then here's a little advertisement that we put on the radio for it.
I've always believed that we were put here for a reason, that there is a path, somehow a divine plan for all of us, and for each one of us. And I've also always believed that this country is hungry.
End of the World's Fair. Saturday, May the 12th, at Dolores Park in San Francisco, a carnival of celebration and refusal. Refusal to be suicided by the powers that be. Celebration of our own human imagination in the midst of decay, violence, and stupidity. Come as you are, or come as you might be. Come as your worst fear or your wildest wish fulfillment. We need actors, acrobats, carpenters, clowns, cooks, dancers, jugglers, musicians, painters, poets, rappers, and above all, people to help put it together. For information, call 626-6048. That's 626-6048 for the End of the World's Fair.
Can't really make that out. It's just a little nuclear family. Are you happy? No? And then here's that's so short I'm not even going to play. I'll just play you a little bit of this for a second and then we'll turn it off. But this just shows you some of the parade. Then we had a lot of props. We made a float called the Terminals Had Ears. And we had a whole little fire that came out about so they all listen. This is 23 years ago. 1984. I was just a literal supervisor. There was
a procession which started.
Let's see.
Circuit board.
That's less than the post-apocalypse fashion show.
Presenting Ms. IBM and her data slaves.
So yeah, this is actually, remember now, 1984, so it was a long time ago. And this is the Hall of Shame tour, it was actually 2 years earlier than this. And that parade, in some ways, is built on the logic of this experience. which was a lot of the sort of anti-nuclear activists, who were many of them very anarchistic at this point, and been involved in it, and, you know, the Diablo Alliance and fighting Diablo Canyon, and to some extent were at the periphery of the nuclear freeze movement. Most people who were doing this stuff in the streets were pretty critical of the freeze as being wholly inadequate. But 82 was the year that was made the big push on the freeze, if you were around, you'll remember. And so they were doing all this stuff going down into the middle of the financial district, like this one was offering people, you know, it was like an MX missile for your lunch, you know, stuff like that. And then you go down a little bit further, and what you get is this technique that was developed, and it actually goes back to before our time. This was going on in 1971, during the May 5th, 1971 mobilization against the Vietnam War. There was a whole tour through this downtown area with sites chosen ahead of time of all the major corporations where people would make speeches in front of them denouncing them for their role in the Vietnam War. Well, here in 1982 it happens again at the Hall of Shame tour, and you go around and there's all these people who are ready to explain to you why what that company was doing was part of the problem around the nuclear industry and the war industries, etc. And by the way, most of those large corporations are no longer in downtown San Francisco. And I don't know for sure that they made corporate decisions to move out because they were getting sick of being subjected to this kind of stuff, but they actually had their employees would come out at lunch and get in dialogues with people really commonly. That was a big part of what people were trying to do, is to have this opportunity to interact with people who, for the most part, in their labor process, had no idea what their work did. All they knew was that they had this little thing they needed to do all the time, right? Whether they were programmers or clericals or whatever they were. And they come out and find out, my company's doing this, the place I work, this is what, well, God damn it, you know, they march back in there and take it up with the boss, or write a letter to their coworker sideways or whatever. That was what people were trying to do, and I actually think it was more effective than we know. And that's conjecture, I can't prove it. But, you know, Chevron moved out to Pleasanton and built this giant corporate campus where you can't get anywhere near anybody that works there. They drive from wherever they live in the burbs into an underground garage at the periphery, and they disappear and you never see them. And if you have a big blockade in front of that driveway, they might get stopped out there until the police clear it. But it's so wide, the driveway into the campus, that it's very hard to blockade it without incredible numbers of people. And it's hard to get them to go out to Pleasanton at 7 in the morning when people start working out there. So there's an interesting thing for future researchers to do more looking into. And then War Chest Tours 2 years later come up with the Democratic Convention in San Francisco. And there's actually 2 different pages on that. There's basically essays here, short essays about that experience. I won't belabor it. By the time you get to the Gulf War in 1991, some of the posters that are up around here, actually they're out in the window. Most of that, you are the target audience, and work is hell, let's go to war. Those are 2 of a series of Arch Debunker posters. And Arch Debunker, of course, is a mythical character. The D was added to make the joke about Archie Bunker from All in the Family, the sitcom. But it was a group of us that met for a while and tried to figure out what can we do about this fucked up war that's coming. And it was one of the things that gave rise to this project, because a lot of us were out there for several months going to weekend demonstrations. For all we didn't like about demonstrations, we still went. And sometimes they got kind of heavy like that with tear gas and spraying and whatnot. There's people doing direct action die-ins and whatnot all around the area. And there was marches of up to 150,000 people. Like, here's just some footage of one of them. But you see the cop car burning, and there was bicycles leading up. There was a bunch of people scouting for demos.
Didn't that shut down the Bay Bridge too?
Yeah, that where that squad car was burning actually. And so, curious thing that happened for me was like a few months later, the war came and went. Right, it was pretty much as they called it, a turkey shoot at the time. The Iraqi troops ran back to Iraq pretty quickly. And of course, if you don't remember the story at the time, April Glaspie was the U.S. ambassador to Iraq and had been talking in direct discussion with Saddam Hussein who only several years earlier was shaking hands with Donald Rumsfeld, trying to cut a deal on a pipeline across Iraq, and get support, and got support from the Reagan administration in their war with Iran. And then now he's basically asking April Glaspie, like, what's the position of the U.S. administration if I take back the 9th province of Iraq, i.e. Kuwait? And April Glaspie says, we don't have a position. What do we need to do? And so that was essentially the deke. So, and he goes, and then the next thing you know, George W. Bush, H.W. Bush is making speeches to the world about the New World Order, and the U.S. has to be the policeman and prove everything, and this is right at the moment when the Soviet Union is falling and all that stuff. So the war happens, it's over in a month, and then 2 months later, 3 in April, there had been for a number of years then the remnants of the old and new left sort of pull it together every year around April for a big rally called Jobs, Peace, and Justice, which some of us tended to refer to as Jobs, Peace, and Boredom. And it's just like this very predictable march. 25,000 people would show up and be like, jobs, we want jobs. No, we don't want jobs. Jobs are the problem, not the solution. Forget that. And so on. Yeah, we had a different opinion. But it was a place, it was like, sort of like the Answer Coalition is today. They would set the table and everybody would go. And you'd go there and you'd have a chance to talk to each other and have conversations. But I was walking down the street during that one in April 1991, and a friend of mine was walking next to me who I'd been at those rather heavy-duty protests, some of that Bergen police car stuff and whatnot. And we'd been there together during that, and he's just walking along next to me, and he's just like, this is so awful, it's just disgusting, it's such a boring march, why do we even do these things? This is horrible, why isn't there an anti-war movement? It's such a militarized culture. There hasn't been a decent anti-war movement since Vietnam. I'm like, what about 3 months ago? Don't you remember? Oh yeah, well that was good. It only lasted for 3 weeks. But nevertheless, he'd forgotten about it completely. And that was interesting to me. And that kind of was part of the motivation for starting Shaping San Francisco, is because if we don't write down our own lived experiences and our own histories, for sure they get lost. And during that particular war, in that particular moment in the spectacle, the way that was presented, those huge marches of 150,000 people would be on the news for 30 seconds with some news anchor standing in front of people passing by. Well, there's people out here protesting the coming war, and they're very earnest, and it's all very important. And let's go to Fremont and get the other point of view. And there'd be 7 people waving American flags. Bon Hussein, he's Hitler! And they'd get exactly the same treatment, the two things. And they both get really trivialized into like little tiny clips. And it's like, wow, that's the whole documented history of this, and the paper wouldn't even cover it at all. Wow. So no big surprise that we weren't holding our own experiences, because it wasn't even being reflected back to us with the import that it had at the time. So this particular moment was then one of those things that gave rise to our whole thing. Now here's another little intervention we did right at the beginning of critical mass period. I got together with some other friends, and we occasionally use this pseudonymous secret agency of the city government that doesn't know it exists, called the Department of Public Art. And we do art attacks. And so this is one, you'll see it very briefly go by here. It was called The Door is Always Open.
How does the traffic usually have to play with you?
Me personally,
What happens when you are not critically surrounded by the mass? How do you feel?
you're subject to the whim of the automobile. The motorized vehicle there is sort of an invisible commodity, expendable.
Is the whim of the automobile ever left you in a injured position?
No, actually, I only got hit twice.
Only been hit twice.
Not critically, so I can't complain.
You've been hit twice by cars?
Well, I hit the car. I got hit once, coming into the intersection, I got the bike got taken out from under me, and I flew like 10 feet.
What it means to be doored.
That's the art of the
So about 2 years ago, Chris Carlsson and some friends decided to organize an event to promote bicycle safety in San Francisco. The idea started with a few dozen people who would gather on Friday afternoons to disrupt traffic and show solidarity for bicycle safety in downtown San Francisco's financial district. 2 years later, the event now has 1,500, 2,000 bicyclists at a time, and a phalanx of police making sure that everybody obeys everything. And what does it mean to be doored?
And so dooring is this thing that happens when the rather absent-minded car motorist gets out of their car without thinking, and boom, they open their door and are slammed into it. And not long ago, somebody died in San Francisco from that happening. It just went right through his neck, and didn't get his head severed, but he was, killed him.
goes on for quite a while. You can go and check it out on this page called Critical Mass Politics of Pleasure, and found this up. So if you want to see that video, it's full length. It's done by Jonathan Franklin and Richard, I forgot his last name. Anyway, I'm laying on my back. I had my first really bad back injury right before they got me for that, so that's why I look like that. I'm on painkillers, I'm totally stoned, and I'm flat out in agony on my back with a slipped disc. And then soon after that, we did Reclaim May Day. So that whole logic of the end of the World's Fair kept coming back periodically. So David Solnit, some of you may know, and Ali Starr, who later did a lot of work at the Ella Baker Center, and for a while they were Van Jones. They were doing Art and Revolution at the time, and a bunch of other people were part of that group. And then we had a pretty good group of people around Shaping San Francisco, so we had created ourselves as Shaking San Francisco as a theater group, and we created this thing called the Rememberator, which was a series of, it was basically a 12-foot square frame behind these beautiful canvases that some of our friends painted, and we could go inside of there and come out as historical characters and do performances. And so that was part of our experience of Reclaim May Day the first time. Because May Day, nothing had happened in San Francisco May Day for a really long time. I don't know how long, decades. And we thought, let's do May Day. Let's just take it back and do it again. And Peter Lightwell's great essay about the strange and unbelievable history of May Day, the red and green sides of it, and everything was very inspiring. And so we did this part, and then Art Revolution did their thing, and then really 10 other groups created also, including housing groups and immigrant rights groups and whatnot, created their own theater pieces. And it was an unpermitted march. We started at the foot of Market Street, and we came winding through the city. We took every public plaza we could, and a different group had previously arranged they would take that spot to do their performance. And it was totally fun. We had like 2,500 people in this parade through the city, and a lot of them were actually pretty nice art in some cases, and a lot of really funny stuff. So that was 98, and then we did it again in 99. And then in 99, it led directly to Seattle. I mean, this was the group, like David Solnit and Ali were the two main organizers going up and down the West Coast all of 99, promoting the idea after the May Day in May of get together to go to Seattle in the end of November for the WTO. Let's stop the WTO. And if they hadn't done all that organizing work, it would not have happened. And so thanks to that, and of course other people did get involved, lots of other entities, including something like AFL-CIO unions and other groups. But a lot of the logic of that, the whole idea of a big spokes council and having these sort of grassroots, horizontalist-minded people and organizations doing something together politically to intervene, was actually gestating the whole time in this experience in San Francisco as we claim May Day. So that was a piece of it. And then in 99, after the Seattle thing, there was this moment where, oh no, this was before Seattle too, actually, sorry. Some of us had this idea, there was this call for a global day of action on July 18th, 1999. And it was people from the Reclaim the Streets movement in Europe that really started the call. And we've been kind of in cousin relationships with them. John Jordan, who's part of, if you don't know this guy, he's really interesting, and he's part of this thing called the ZAD. Anybody heard of the ZAD?
Z-E-D?
Z-A-D.
Oh, is it like the Hakimbe stuff?
It's kind of a temporary autonomous zone, but it's more than temporary. At this point, it's about a year and a half old, and it's in this huge area where the French want to build a new airport. And they're refusing to leave, and they built this incredible village with towers and all these structures in it. It's super interesting and exciting. And John Jordan's been super involved in it. But if you've read it in the literature of Reclaim the Streets from England, in the 90s, he was the author of a huge amount of it. He was really brilliant at what he was doing. And so the word had come. Everybody's going to do a global day of action. People in the Philippines are acting, and Korea, and everywhere. And so, okay, we're going to do it too. So some friends, must remain anonymous, pulled this off, and I'm just going to play the beginning of it. This was the idea was to, I'll just explain it so you totally get it while you watch it. The idea was to tie up Wall Street West, and you'll see there's a joke, a pun in that in a minute, but it took about 90 seconds and 15 people to do it, and we're going to watch it happen. This is an anonymous guy filming it while we're doing it, but we didn't know he was there.
Look at Montgomery Street. I think it's public art. It's art. Yeah.
We were so, that guy, we thought was a cop for sure. He wasn't.
You need to get a squad up here. They shut it down.
From 300 to Adam 201 with the medallion.
What I'm going to, I'm thinking is get 91 and 92 right now. I'm 97 here, and I'll stand by for your squad, but they get all shut down.
And here comes the cavalry.
So you could watch the whole thing later if you want to, but it basically, yeah, they backdoored us. There's the punchline right there. So it was really one of those moments. And basically, they ended up using this in Seattle. Other people, I don't even know who, but they knew about this event in San Francisco. So when we shut down the WTO in Seattle, I remember we were in a committee for full enjoyment drumming crew, and we came upon this street outside of the convention center, and it looked exactly like this. We're like, oh wow, how cool, man, so we figured it out. So this is the photograph of the street. And you know, it wasn't really meant to hold the space for that long. It only held it for whatever. But that's the funny thing about that video, it's real time. So you really see how long it took to do it. And you see, like, everybody's kind of looking kind of anonymous, wearing hats and weird sweaters. We all had an escape strategy. And then if you listen to the whole thing, the police don't even notice it until it's completely gone and we're already left. Then now they're finally getting word of it, right? And they're actually downtown with their 400 people having a demo at Justin Hare Plaza. And so what they finally started announcing is like, yes, it's young people with backpacks. It was not. None of us had a backpack. Nobody looked particularly young. Well, my daughter might have. Mostly nobody looked very young at the moment. And there was about 15 of us who planned it out. We actually each had an assignment of where to go and how to cross the street and which poles to hit and everything, which nobody really lived up to. But we had 3 of us with mail bags full of 170 neckties tied to rope already. And each one of them had that little silent box with Wall Street buses all tied up. So as you ran along, it would come out of the bag and you just like put it up. The idea is to show what you could do. That's what you wanted. If you wanted to do this with like real chains and really stop this thing, not going to be very difficult to do. The key was having a guy who knows how to make some professional signs too at the front of the thing. Final thing to just point out is that in 2003, of course, this culture that had done all these other things before came back out again. And this map was made on a kitchen table that I know well. And I was actually in town when it finally happened, when the war started against Iraq in March of, in fact, I think today's the anniversary, or just past the anniversary, the 20th, wasn't it, yesterday, from 2003, so 14 years ago. And so the idea was to create a map that was essentially a menu, and everybody could pick where they wanted. First, primi piatti or secondi piatti, and pick your location. You can decide where you want to go, and your own group can decide what you want to do there. And that worked unbelievably well, because no central organizing was required, other than to get this into lots of people's hands and have a plan, and when the war starts, pick a spot and do something. And the entire city was shut down. There were 2,000 people that were committed to doing something, 20,000 people participated. And because the 2,000 people all had activity groups and a structure of how they wanted to take an intersection and do something, either tying it up or blockading it with barricades or what have you, dying in on bicycles, but all sorts of different things happened. Or some people were doing like yoga and dancing. And it's just like everything was okay. It didn't matter. Do whatever you want, but get out there and do something. And with that kind of structure, very much parallel to the previous maps around the Hall of Shame tour and the stuff that happened several times through the history of San Francisco already by then. So, and then I think there's somebody who's working on doing one of these right now to get ready for the next round of stuff that's coming up. So that's a little bit of stuff that I have very small fingers in sometimes more full palm of my hand. But I think I just want to remind what I was talking about earlier, sort of some of the problems that we've created for ourselves because of our urgent necessity of being always completely, perfectly right and totally revolutionary at the front edge of everything. And like, yeah, that's kind of an honest place to start when you're young. But I'm 60. I just turned 60. And I can't honestly think that's a very good position to hold in this moment in history, because at this point, we need all hands on deck. We just can't really turn anybody away who wants to help and be part of creating another way of life. And the goal is not to just have a new government, in my opinion. I know that's probably going to be an intermediate step. And I'm not going to argue against it necessarily in public, but in this moment I can say that my goal has been for quite a long time, and remains so today, to change how we live, to change how we make life. Like when we get up in the morning, let's make the life we want instead of the life we got stuck with. Like, why do we keep going back and keep making the same thing we're stuck with? I don't get it. And a big part of my work that I carry on with every day of my life now is doing history. And I think that that's my best contribution I can make. A big part of what I've noticed is it's a little less true now because nobody comes to San Francisco and work. It's too fucking expensive. Nobody can move there. But for hundreds of years, decades, people have been coming to San Francisco to start the revolution, change the world of poetry, of literature, of music, of dance, of performance, of politics, you name it. And that's part of why it's been a fun place to live, because there's this endless influx of new energy and new creativity constantly arriving on the shores of the city. And that's not really happening too much anymore. It is a little bit, not too much. But the point of this project, in part, there's many explanations and many reasons, was to make it possible for people to come and find out what happened before they got here. Because an awful lot of times their best ideas, it's actually been tried 4 times already. So let's see what we can do to get beyond that. And hopefully, whatever you're up to subversively in the future, you can spend a little time on our archive and see if anybody tried it yet. See what else you might add or what wrinkles you can introduce to the story to maybe go in a different direction. Anyway, I'll stop talking. I'm happy to answer questions or hear your rebuttals and denunciations, whatever the case may be. I'm happy to be expelled. So thank you.
So did you read, I wanted to ask, did you read the situations at all, or was it at some point, was that some of the work informed, or?
No, I did. I mean, I've read a lot of stuff over the years. I don't think I ever sat down and did the body of the work and stuff to finish. I read lots of essays in Ken Young's translations of the situation international. I love the stuff I like the stuff that really fit these guys, the pre-situationist stuff, psychoanalysis. And then, I love the comments on the Society of Spectacle. I just was rereading that the other day before this, and I think that is a really rich book. That is totally worth coming back to again and again. It doesn't get old. But the original Society of Spectacle I consider to be just a church of mess, mostly. Partly because of the translation that I saw the first time around. It was really bad. I think Donald Nicholson Smith done a much better translation. So I really should go back and do it. But it's one of those things where as your life speeds along, you make a decision about what you're going to spend your time reading. I have so many projects in front of me and so many books on the shelf that I want to read, and it's like, is that the one that I want to go? No, not really. I've read some of the, Grail Marcus and various there's a lot of stuff that has addressed the situationists, so you get a lot of it through osmosis from other books. And many of my friends, I've known people I've talked to real situationists in my life, and I've been in a conversation with radicals who spent a lot more time in the University than I ever did, which is part of my reluctance to go back to it. It's like, no, I get it. I know what that's going to lead. I know where that goes, and I know, I've learned enough about it to know that I don't need to be the expert on that. And in Deluge, Revolutionaries Everyday Life, I've actually almost met him twice. We almost had this moment because he liked a lot of the stuff I was writing. Donald Nicholson Smith is a good engineer. So he was sending my stuff directly to him, and I was like, well, it'd be great, but we just haven't ever had a direct connection. So,
Actually, I almost sort of said when I was seeing the whole presentation, people sort of very often forget there's sort of 2 sides to the situation. Is the war side, which is very austere and intellectual and almost deliberately obtuse and theoretical, and then you've got sort of some of the Vinegan side, which is what people always is completely different. It's all about everyday life and the revolution of everyday life and sort of a lot of that stuff. So I'm just watching a lot of this presentation, I was like, it sort of reminds me a lot of this kind of, and that got suppressed obviously because the Bob was the leader, but anyway, so I was going to ask you about that. You sort of well, they all got expelled, but I think there was a lot of like playfulness and things like they even conquering urban space, appropriating urban space, all that was kind of came from that side of the movement.
Well, that's always where my happy side has been too.
Yeah.
And all the work that I've done for all years and years. I mean, I started using that language back around 1979, 1980 about everyday life. Everyday life is where everything happens from. So, history from below is another way of talking about the history project. And so having it emerging from our everyday lived experiences is the key to me. And what's often lost in the shuffle, and certainly lost in the archives.
That was actually my other question about the archive. Because I think, before I called you, I spent an incredible amount of time, and it's amazing. It's just amazing what you have. It blew my mind really. However, I was going to ask, how do people just, how do you build it? Continue to
Yeah, well, that's
the
the question. Here's the drama is that I say about fully 85 to 90% of the stuff I curate, but I find it and I get it and I put it in.
Okay.
And it's a lot of times getting chapters out of books and writing to the author and saying, can I use this? And I know a lot of people at this point, I've been around a long time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
most of my friends are writing books, oftentimes stuff I'm interested in that fits this project, so I get a lot of really interesting material that way. I also asked, like Dick Walker just gave us his entire body of work. So it's like,
wow.
Awesome. And I spent a month putting all of it in. So now we have this really rich political economic analysis and all these different areas that we wouldn't have had before. I've used a ton of my own writing from all these years of doing Process World and articles from Process World that I think are historically merited. I put in. So we have a lot of material started, and also I was collecting stuff earlier in my life without knowing why, old photos and maps and stuff like that. So I would take credit for saying, kind of frustrating to me. I have to do so that I am the filter for so much of it. I wish that wasn't so, but maybe in some ways, the interesting question that comes up in that is probably in the mid-90s when we're starting, there was a lot of new writing thinking about this idea of the breakdown of the author, and that the reader was the author by the choices that they made as they went through a non-linear space. And I was very attracted to that. I thought, yeah, that sounds so interesting. Yeah, let's play with it and see what it's like. And I spent a lot of time watching people use the site or talk to them after they use it. And I asked them, and they don't have that experience of being the writer. They have experience of going through a chaotic mess without any clear organization.
Right.
And there's organization through, you can see all those tabs at the top of the screen. Let's put that on so that people see the navigational system again. But, so those tabs up here give you a way into everything, right? So you pick theme, there's like 100 and some themes, there's neighborhoods, 30 of them or so, or tours if you want, or populations. And so there are organizational structures that we created. But the idea of the grand narrative broke down, right? Like that's something that a lot of the history from below people were trying very hard. And certainly all the post-structuralists and left theoreticians of various types spent a lot of time saying, no, we need to do away with the grand narratives, with the overarching explanation of everything. And I don't know if you happen to catch this, some of the writing that's come out lately on work and on the politics of work, but there's one book called Inventing the Future by these two guys who call themselves accelerationists. And they actually make an interesting point in there. They say, yeah, it's true that all this stuff led to the breakdown of the narrative, sort of the overarching narrative, but here's the problem is that with the breakdown of the narrative, what it really did was invalidate a left-wing argument about how much better life would be. And it didn't really invalidate the idea of the grand narrative, it just left us with the neoliberal narrative. Right. That's the only one that makes any sense to me, but that's the one that's true, which you don't kind of go back to the perspective. So I think they're right about that. I think that is one of the dilemmas. And so when you going back to where we started this moment, like I in the beginning was very interested in keeping it in this really odd, non-linear way that you find your way, what you're interested in. And I still think that's a useful part of the project, that does work for some people pretty well. If you're self-motivated, it works really well. Yeah. And you kind of know what you're looking for, you know how to ask for it, you can find it. If it's there, it's not always there. But I also give tours a lot, like this kind of experience you just had, or more specifically about transportation history, or ecological history, or labor history. Or
the murals that I didn't count, that was great.
Yeah, there's this one that goes from the murals at Ringland Annex to the murals at Carlsson, goes through the whole history of the town. I've created narratives that take you on a specific path through some of the material. And that's also how those tours are, kind of. Although frankly, those are also fairly coherent. So I'm now feeling like having done this for the better part of 20 plus years, that there's a problem in the lack of the editor's voice, the author. And it doesn't mean that I have to write everything, but somebody's got to help you go through the material or frame it for you to give you a sense of meaning. Or else it's very easy to just have this kind of random experience, which I'm not against that. Go ahead and have a random experience. But there's lots of things that I think we could learn from it if somebody framed it for you and said, take this path, and you're going to get a really interesting frame of reference for you when you're thinking about other stuff. If you don't take that path, you won't get it. But taking the path means you've got to read that stuff too. Or have a big mouth like me standing next to you telling you that. Which for some people is better. But, so anyway, I think there's an unsolved problem that your question brings forward, which is, what's the role of narrative and author in a nonlinear media experience? And that we need to bring that into the foreground in a way that so far in our project we haven't, as much as we might. We tried that from the very beginning projects when the CD-ROM we did have that more. Now, it's just such a big headache about how to do that, but I don't have an easy answer for it.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of narrative, you were talking earlier about like historical amnesia. I think, having narratives helps people remember things a lot easier too. Take a collection of facts, and you might be like, that's interesting, that's interesting, that's interesting. You put it all together, and I think you have a much better chance of remembering it 5 or 10 or 15 years on the line when there's a story and I think connects all those things.
Yeah, and I will say, for everybody who doesn't already know, Liam's doing this podcast here, East Bay Yesterday, that does a really nice job of creating a very coherent narrative out of very interesting stories of East Bay history. And he's not stuck in the past.
What is your podcast?
East Bay Yesterday. It's on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, all that stuff. East Bay Yesterday.
Yeah.
I made it rhyme, so it's easy to remember.
I'm going to check it out.
It's very good.
That's good.
Yeah.
So there's no more process for it. You're not going to revive it.
No, there's that regularly.
A couple of people have asked me, that's why I'm asking.
Well, it comes up all the time for all of us who ever did it. It's so obvious that it's as relevant as ever to have a publication that's a really critical magazine about work, technology, neoliberal order, etc. Why not? But I can tell you why not. It's an enormous amount of work, and it cannot pay for itself. You have to have a wealthy person who says, I'm going to pay for that. Now will you do all that work? Maybe, but not without that. And there's no way that's going to appear.
I was going to say, that's the thing that no wealthy man wants to sponsor.
Why would a wealthy person pay for that? It's a magazine dedicated to the overthrow of money.
Yes.
Bit of a contradiction. I was up against that over everything when I raised money all the years. Like, yeah, you should fund what I do because I'm trying to overthrow the world that you've got all your money from.
After all your experience, trying to organize many different kinds of happenings and protests and things like that in San Francisco and the Bay Area generally, would you say that the model that you showed for the 2003 war in Iraq, where you just made a map and gave a rubric and handed it out, was that approach based on the frustration of having to deal with all the egos of every little splinter group that you might have worked with over the years?
Well, I wasn't the person who led that. I helped design the map because I know the city so well, so I was on my kitchen table and the points of interest were plotted out, but it was David who was really the one pushing the whole idea of that structure. And I would say that David and I share a general desire for self-motivated activity. That's really what it boils down to. And a general abhorrence of the organized left, which wants to squelch self-organized activity, have you be fodder, cannon fodder, and asses. All of us come and listen to us bark at you. Show up on Friday when we tell you to, leave when we tell you to, carry the sign we want you to carry. Like that culture's over, in my opinion, and it's mostly, doesn't have a future. And there is a problem about always relying on, here I have this problem pedagogically, because I run into it all the time. I teach a lot now as an adjunct and a road scholar, as they say, traveling from campus to campus. And you get this problem where, well, I have a problem because of the way I function. Like, I don't like school. I hated it. I dropped out of it. I never got a BA. I was just like, I fucking hated college. I thought it was a waste of time. And it was partly because I can't stand being told what to read or what to think or what to write. I want to just do what I want to do. It's kind of my whole life's been based on that. So when I get into a teaching situation, I kind of assume that that's where the students should be at. They should be already there for a reason, and they should be so I got the dump truck theory of pedagogy. You back up the truck, and you and all the stuff onto the floor. There's all these diamonds there. Help yourself. Whatever you're interested in. I gave you way more than you could possibly use. Take what you're interested in. Very few students respond well to that. It just does not work. They want to be told, what do I need to do for an A? What's the next assignment? When do I have to have it in? Da, 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 da. It's just like, I'm not. Well, yeah, I mean, the whole world they do.
You read Foucault and you understand what is okay, right?
Sure, of course. I mean, you can't break the whole structure of consciousness in one class. Not much more than socialism in one country, one city. So, I do understand that that's the problem, but I still stubbornly insist on trying that model out over and over again, because that's what would work for me as a student. Like, I'm just not going to respond well to anything else but that. Whereas, I get always a few students who do great at that, and they're like, wow, this is fun, this is awesome. And then a bunch of them are just like completely stressed out because they do not have the little step-by-step model that they need to get through the class. So I'm getting better at giving them that too, because that is my fucking job. But I don't really appreciate doing that.
So, I'd be curious to hear how you think about current sort of models or modes of resistance, and which ones you see as sort of being interesting to you, given what you've done. Perhaps especially things like digital, where you see people like, I think, hacking certain accounts and having sort of online digital demo, but that's just an example. But I'd love to hear sort of what some of the things you see as sort of building on what you've done and you think are exciting.
I'm not excited about anything right now, to be honest. I'm just not. There's nothing that I feel like, wow, that's happening and it's going to go somewhere. I'm cautiously hopeful about how many people realize that representation is not going to solve their problem right now, and that they have to do it themselves. That's really hopeful. And there's way more people in that category right now than have been in that category for a very long time. And it's very unpredictable where that leads us, and that's great. We need some unpredictability because otherwise it's really far. The kinds of problems that we're up against, it's not like I'm not telling you something you don't already know, but the facts are very bad. When it comes to the climate and the hard physics of the world, we have to turn around and super fast, or we're really not going to make it. So when I think about arable land and all those kind of things, I get really discouraged. But in terms of the kinds of initiatives that I generally find encouraging, I wrote about them in my book Nowtopia 10 years ago practically, and let me say what they are and then critique them at the same time, because I actually have both points of view about them. But the idea of that book that I wrote was to try to look at, because I realized, well, if I believe in revolution, and I do, then it ought to be visible. It ought to be actually something that's in the world around me now. It's not something that's going to fall from the sky. There's not going to be some religious transformation. It's not going to be some deus ex machina that comes along and brings it to us. It's going to come out of actual human beings that I know and things they do. That's my honest feeling. If it doesn't come from there, it doesn't happen. So, well, guess what? There's a lot of stuff people are going and doing. Some of the stuff you're referring to, there's like, I have a whole chapter called The Virtual Spine of the Commons. And it's about how much interesting activity and energy happens around digital activities and communications, creating things outside of the logic of money, outside of the logic of remuneration, for purposes of shared experiences, for subversive experiences or projects or what have you. And so that's one aspect of it. Another one is, the sort of mundane reality of people doing their community gardens. That's really simple, but you put your hands in the soil on a regular basis. You get to know your dirt, the water, the patterns of sun, what grows where you live. And frankly, given my previous comment about the agricultural problems we're very soon going to face, having more decentralized production of food locally close to home to me just like basic survival. We're going to have to get better at that. Bicycling was had its moment, its past, and the bicycling culture has collapsed around here. But in the 90s, when it was still kind of like a way of establishing solidarity and creating cultural opposition to the stupidity of American life, there was a tremendous amount of ferment and interesting things developing, from bike kitchens to bike ballet and all bike circuses, and just like all this stuff was happening all of a sudden. And the bike kitchens were so beautiful was they were taking the waste stream of discarded bicycles and parts, so they weren't spending any money, and they were taking these things and they're bringing them into cooperative workspaces where skill sharing was systematic. You couldn't get somebody to fix your bike. No, you fix your bike, we'll show you how to do it. And then you're in there working and you're standing next to somebody who's like a 10-year-old black kid. When am I going to talk to a 10-year-old black kid? Never. But now I'm in the conversation and I find he's like, what do you do? Well, I do this weird history project. And what do you do? Well, I go to this stupid school where they don't teach you anything. And we have an interesting conversation, and then suddenly maybe we're on a bike ride together one day. Those moments seem really exciting to me, because and the argument that I made, and there's other examples too that I have in the book. At one point, biofuels, cooperative movements seem possible to be kind of in the same camp. And also, all these initiatives that I wrote about in the mid-2000s were threatened at the time or already succumbing to the logic of the market. That is to say that as they succeeded at maintaining themselves as cooperative endeavors, they faced the problem that they had to pay rent. People who are doing all the time and energy here need to get something out of it because they can't have a day job and do this. This has to become their day job. And so they eventually would turn into businesses or nonprofits. Or they say, no, we're going out of business. We're just going to stop because it doesn't function over a long period of time. It's good for a little while and then it's not. So a lot of these things have disappeared, and rightfully so. And the ones that have persisted have failed because they succeeded, or they succeeded as they failed, however you want to put it. And it's fine if somebody needs to make a living in a small business. More power to them. I have to do the same. It's just, you got to survive. There's nothing wrong with surviving. But that loses its possibility of being kind of kernel of radicalism. But what I was excited about when it was still happening, or I felt it was still happening kind of strongly, and I still think this is what I look for, is places where, the autonomous Marxist point of view of the composition of class, right? So you have this unbelievable fragmentation, atomization, and decomposition of the working class that we live. That's our world. And so nobody thinks they're in the working class, even though they all have to work for money. Everybody thinks they're middle class, and it's a bizarre world. But I felt like in those activities where people took their time and their technological know-how out of the market, and we're doing really interesting, creative, shared activities with each other and building new relationships that transcended workplaces and neighborhoods. It was actually about doing this stuff together with a practical goal of making life better today. And by the way, guess what? It makes life better in a bigger sense, too. And that was exciting to me. That felt like that was the kernel of the recomposition of the working class on its own terms. And then you get really grandiose about it. You could make an argument around the general intellect. Like capital has dominated the way the structure of technology, science, and life has been for a very long time. And there's all these interesting examples of people saying, wait a minute, no, don't like that. Or you want to go back to, like, say, the farm workers refusing to be sprayed with DDT, or women's self-help health movement saying, modern medicine is not taking care of us at all. We're going to take care of ourselves through books and through clinics we make and all this kind of. That's appropriating scientific knowledge and creating another logic of how to share it that's very horizontalist. The anti-nuclear movement is a great example of this too. People had to teach each other about the fucking science of energy in order to stop the madmen in white lab coats who were the experts in continuing to push that stuff down the road, that are living through chemistry, that are living through atomics, etc. So there's all these interesting examples over a period of time, over the last 30 or 40 years, of people beginning to appropriate the general intellect to the basic society, in which more and more people know more and more about how we can actually reproduce life on a different basis. That's exciting to me. But that's incredibly abstract. Yeah. So who's doing that work? Where's the actual projects? Where are the actual relationships? They're hard to find. And when you find them, they slip away really fast because people got to make a living. And it costs a lot to live. And so they get beaten down by that reality. So that's my answer. Not a very good one. The world out there.
So I'm trying to read, do you ever read Mencius, The Sections of Politics?
No, somebody else has actually told me I should check that out.
I want to mention at the end of a section of it's only 4 pages, 5 pages, it's really short, but it's all down there. And he identifies something that fascinated by it, and that is that we know we take for granted that those are a few society. That's because they're craftsmen, not because they're not creating the artists today, they're craftsmen. And they're therefore reproducing and creating new work, and therefore there's a truth in what we do, which is plastic. And he says, even though that's the case, what's even more abhorrent to the public is the mind. Because the mind twins the private space of work, wherein you're alienated and repressed, with the public space of life. And you twin the two things in one activity, and you become abhorrent.
Yeah.
You become the center of the abhorrent. Because you're both working and creating everything.
Yeah.
And that can't be.
And you're creating your own demise, essentially. Yeah, that's pretty smart. I'll have to check that out.
It's great.
Is it the one that says the lady?
No.
Did you see that video?
They did great joint worship jobs.
Oh, right, yeah. I'm not reading a book about bureaucracy. Bullshit jobs, and I felt like, I wrote this for you. But bureaucracy, I think he's doing more. He's good anthology.
You should populate the book with stories, because you can just send an email, mybullshitjob@gmail.com, and that's where you get everything.
Oh, good. Did you ever see Marcus Cross's book called Sabotage in the American Workplace? That was a great collection that he did in Colorado. And it's just one story after another from people who dropped. And I wrote on the book of Sabotage in the Workplace.
Is that online?
I don't think so. It was a book published that he did. He was actually part of the Maximum Rock and Roll Money. Like, they got so much money they actually paid him to do this book too. And it was totally on the side. But I don't know what would happen with him. He was in Colorado. But anyway, that whole book would be appropriate for something like that. Because actually, every story is about somebody doing something about that bullshit job. It's even better than other
This is not a question, but I was going to say, do you remember Lex back Alexis?
No.
Oh,
yeah.
He says like, which is you saw the thing I posted on Facebook. Chris Carlsson. He's my friend, say hi.
Yeah. I think it was Lex, because I always interact most of the time through the email, so it was Alexis Potter.
Yes, he's very official. No, he's saying hi to you.
So I did bring an extra bonus present for anybody who wants one, which is these are some original process worlds that are.
Yes.
These are gifts. Who wants a gift?
Yes.
I'll come closer to grab one.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thank you.
It's awesome.
I have the full run.
Okay. That's this one I want to keep.
You don't need one.
I have all of them.
This is the one I want to keep anyway. So
I'd never heard the distribution story, so thanks.
oh, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.